Kushanku. Kushanku. By now you'll have seen the video demonstrations with Sensei showing you the kata, running through the kata, bunkai. But there's more to Kushanku than the bunkai. A lot of the bunkai in Kushanku you may have already covered in the Pinans. So you should be sort of fairly familiar. So there should be more to Kushanku than just repeating what you've already done. As we touched on with Pinan Kata, you have the jump. We mentioned that a lot of isometric training involves static leaping onto boxes to develop huge power in the legs and the midsection. So hopefully by now you've developed enough physical strength through practicing the 5 Pinan Katas to get to Kushanku. I watched a video the other day. It wasn't about karate fitness training. It was general fitness training, and the first thing they suggested people did was stand in kibadachi for as long as possible, because it develops huge leg strength. So your 5 Pinan Katas should have got you to this stage. The jumping go down should have developed more strength. So with Kushanku, the additional purpose, as far as I can see, is fitness and endurance. To do the whole kata with full intensity and full kime is tiring, exhausting. And if you do it several times, it's very tiring, very exhausting. So hopefully now your 5 Pinans are giving you the strength. Now Kushanku is going to give you the endurance. And that's the physical aspect, is developing endurance through practicing the kata. But the other is the mental aspect, is if you do it with full kime, full focus, full intent, to maintain that for the entire length of the kata is quite a challenge. You can do it in a Pinan because they're not so long. You can really perform at full mental output, full kime. But to do it in Kushanku is a whole other matter. So you should, or may be useful if you can look for little mushin sections, no mind. So points where you can take a breather and just sort of let it go a little bit before you go back to the full intent, full kime. If you're doing big long katas, it's a very useful little trick to put in your arsenal, is to find these little pauses where you can mentally and physically take a break. So you're not trying to blast through the kata like a metronome. So that's another way of thinking of Kushanku, beyond the physical, getting into the mental aspects. The other is interpretation. There are some odd-looking movements in Kushanku, and this is where you can look at them and you can take them as a literal interpretation, or try and be a little bit more imaginative. And as I've said with the Pinans, is I've been trying to look at them in a more throwing and grappling and takedown frame of mind, rather than just a pure block punch. I set myself a little project for each year in January, and my project for this year is takedowns and throws. It's something that's got lost in karate, I feel, over the years. And to complete the system, you need to have them. You don't have to be an expert at judo or jiu-jitsu, but if you've got them in your arsenal, it's very useful. So we'll have a little look at some of these interpretations that may be more throw in joint locking rather than just pure karate. And then there's the history of the kata. People seem to agree that Kushanku was a real person. Some say he was a Chinese military official, some say a Chinese diplomat, some say he was a Chinese sailor. But sometime in the 1700s, he arrived in Okinawa and brought this kata with him. And Kushanku is apparently the Okinawan pronunciation of his Chinese name. So it seems fairly certain there was an actual person, and Kushanku is the Okinawan version of his name. So this sort of kata is at least 300 years old, if Kushanku himself invented it. But it may have been already 300 years old by the time Kushanku brought it to to Okinawa. So the history gets a little bit vague, and that can be one of those glass half empty, glass half full. The glass half empty would be, well, we've lost all this fantastic knowledge over the 300 years. The glass half full would be, okay, we don't know what Mr. Kushanku was thinking with his kata, so this gives us the opportunity to create our own interpretations. Maybe they're nowhere near as good, but maybe they're better. So as we can't know what was the original intentions, we've got to try and come up with our best ideas of what we can do with them. And the final point is we've mentioned in the Pinan series about the three-phase fighting system. So you've got your stand-up, your block punches, your grappling, which we've covered in the Pinans. The third phase is the floor work. So I had a little look at one of the techniques in Kushanku, and it can be adapted quite easily to floor work. So we'll finally get around to the third phase, which is going to the floor. Looking at an interpretation of the section in the kata where we have this type of technique. Yes, you can sort of, it's a block, another block for a lower level attack, but you can also use it as a springboard to an attack and into an arm lock and get rid of your opponent. So for example, if we're both in this fighting position, I can use this to push in. I've taken control of him, pushed in, strike, wrap underneath, arm lock him, come up, send him on his way. So we now have a strike, an arm lock, controlling your opponent. So that's back to this idea of tagumi. So rather than it being a strike and a block, it's now an arm lock. So that's the second of the three phases we're going to speak about. So a further section of the kata involves dropping to the floor. Looking at that as a practical technique, in Sensei's demonstration, doing leg grabs. So this is a potential counter for a leg grab. So if we imagine I've done a Mayagiri, he's caught it, a simple way to get out of this catch is to take control and push down. If we apply the principles in the kata, we've got the leg grab, compression strike, boom. Push down to release, drop to take his leg, take him to the floor. So that now becomes a practical, useful technique. Your legs got caught, you can get out, compression strike, very powerful. If I hit him normally, his head can rock. Compression strike, he's got nowhere to go. You get hit with them and it feels like a bolt's gone straight through your head. Horrible. Kick out, grab, take him to the floor. So a nice, useful, practical technique. We have the luxury of video these days. So you can rewind these videos, watch them multiple times, put them on slow-mo, really get the most out of them. But years gone by, you only had books. And I've got sort of several books at home from various karate masters from years gone by. And it's frustrating because you can see the pictures, but you have to try and mentally fill in the bits in between. So I've had to sort of think about this, and if you imagine we were going to make a book, you would have to take photographs of the key points of a technique and then put that in the book, and then hopefully people can fill in the gaps. So for example, if I was going to, in a book, show an agoshi judo throw, I would have to set up various key points within the throw. So if I can borrow Simon, we would potentially be starting here. The next photograph would be here, like we've seen in the kata, and then the final would be here, ready to do the throw. So you have to look at some of these techniques when they hit a point and think to yourself, well, if I was taking photographs of that for a book, what is that telling me? And it may be unrelated to the thing that actually comes after it. They're just hitting a point to say, you are potentially doing a throw here. But if the throw's not available, then we'll go and do something else. But if you sort of think of it in that mindset rather than video, this made absolutely no sense to me at all until I thought about it in freeze frame. My leg's caught, I'll hit him, get out, grab his ankles, throw him. All of a sudden it makes a lot of sense. So that could be a useful way if you see things in katas and you go, well, I can't understand that. Imagine you're taking photographs that you need to put in a book, and you can only photograph the key points of the technique. And then hopefully everybody else can fill in the blanks between. So we mentioned in the key points about literal and more imaginative interpretations of techniques. So we're going to demonstrate the end section of the kata and do it as a literal interpretation. We mentioned in the Pinan series that the whole point of kata is you can pick and mix the techniques as you need them. They don't have to be done in sequence, and they don't have to be related to each other. So we're going to use a section of the kata and then go into the end section. So this is from earlier section in the kata. This is going to be the literal translation. Underneath, lift him up. From here, I would throw him and let concrete and gravity do the work. Powerful. I mean, I wouldn't drop him on these mats, they're not nowhere near thick enough. But that's a literal interpretation of that technique. You know, hoisting somebody up, throw them on the floor. So this is another interpretation of the end section of the kata. As we mentioned, you can pick and mix. So in the previous one, we used block and punch from the middle section of the kata. This time we're going to the beginning of the kata and then doing a slightly different interpretation of the takedown at the end. So the attack comes in. We're going to use Myo today. Sensei discussed this in earlier, where we use husband and wife hands. Strike. The kata tells me to go round behind him. So I'm going to go round behind him, hands on the shoulders, take him down. So we covered this in the Pinan Shodan, where if your spidey sense tells you something behind you, that might work. But more realistically, what it's telling you is you need to be behind your opponent. So we're using that same principle again, the hands up, takes his shoulders, use his foot coming round as an ashibarai and pull him down. And one final interpretation of the is I've seen this on an old World War II military commando training video. So certainly in World War II, the Royal Marine Commandos were using this. So if it's good enough for them, I think it's good enough for me. So again, same principle. Attack comes in, Myoto Day. So we're back to the beginning of the kata. Kata tells us to go behind him. We go behind him, take his legs, take him to the floor. For safety's sake, went to the knees. As we mentioned with one of the earlier takedowns, if you can go right down to the ankles, hoist the ankles up face first into the ground, and you're letting gravity and concrete do the work. So just slightly different ways of looking at potential techniques in the kata. Hopefully you might find some use with it. And the final of the key points, and we've mentioned it all through the Pinan series, is this idea of 3-phase. We've done block punch, we've done grapple, we've now gone to the floor. And again, it's another interpretation of this final section of the kata. A lot of stuff that you do standing up, you can apply to the floor. And especially, we're going to be looking at these juji arm positions. So we've taken him to the floor. There's fantastic videos out there about how to pass the guard. We won't get into that. But what we'll do is imagine we've taken him to the floor and we've gone into full mount. Now the kata shows us kibadachi. So kibadachi can be putting the hooks into his feet. If you do shikadachi and turn your feet out, you can escape. If you do kibadachi, turn your toes in, you've hooked him. That makes it much more difficult for him to try and get me off from full mount. Not impossible, but more difficult. So now, if we look at these potential juji positions, if we take his arm, yep, there's the one part of the juji. Swipe round to isolate the shoulder, come through for the juji. There we go. Americana, quite a common jiu-jitsu move you see in MMA fights. So that's just a reinterpretation of the juji position with the hooks in kibadachi. That's a little bit technical. If you want a really quick and dirty, we've got our hooks in, we come underneath, hand across. It's called an Ezekiel choke. It takes nothing. Grip your own forearms, compress. So now we're into floor fighting techniques, but we're using the techniques that we were learning standing up. Choked him out. The final position, rake the eyes. So the entire last section of the kata, we've managed to do that on the floor. So just because you're standing up doesn't mean you can't do it on the deck.
So thank you for watching our version of Kushanku. I'll say it again, I'll always say it, if your instructor does not want to do any of this, then please respect them. This is just us looking at the kata in different ways. Kushanku, what does it mean to me? I can remember, and I'm sure you can, when you first started to learn Kushanku, you thought, I'm never ever going to remember 70 odd moves. Okay, so my advice, if you're starting to learn Kushanku, then it's basically, you can split it up into 4 sections. From the start up till the 3 shutos, and then from the 3 shutos to the 2 shutos, 2 shutos to the 1 shuto, and from the 1 shuto to the end. So if you break it down into 4 portions, don't try and learn it all in one. Just go up to the 4 shutos, 3, 2, 1 to the end. So that's a good way of breaking the kata down and portioning it out. Since you mentioned about the mental aspect of Kushanku as well, and I'm sure you've all done it. You start off with all good intentions, great stances, good mental attitude, then you get faster and faster and faster and faster, and your stances get shorter and shorter and shorter, till at the end, you've got no kata at all. So, first of all, once you've learnt all the moves, then try and do it so as it's just flowing. So there's no 1, 2, 3, stop. 1, 2, 3, yeah. Just make sure it flows all the way through. Ryu sweep, all the way through. And then start to do it slowly. So you have time to finish off your stances, finish off your technique. And then what you need to do then is amalgamate all that Ryu sweep, all that flowing technique, and break it down into sections and have the physical and mental aspect that goes with it. It is demanding, so, but it's there. And it's a fundamental part of most karate styles. So, yeah, hope you've enjoyed it. If you have, please like. If you haven't. So, yeah. And keep the communication up as well. As I said before, we enjoy it. So, thank you very much. Ush.